Hi, everyone. It's time for 3 at 3 on Solar PV again. I'm Jenn Runyon, Chief Editor of Renewable Energy World.
And I'm Paula Mintz, Chief Market Research Analyst, SPV Market Research.
So every week or every other week, we try to get together and talk about 3 topics in the solar market for 3 minutes each. Today's topics are going to be First Solar's announcement that they're restructuring and making some major layoffs. SolarCity, Tesla, they're officially merging now. And then we'll move into just the residential solar market. So let's start with First Solar. And I wrote an article about this on Renewable Energy World. They announced that they were restructuring just 1 week after Trump was elected, and it had, I don't know if that was, I don't think people in the industry realized that those two things are not related at all. And Trump being elected has nothing to do with First Solar's restructuring. So what do you know about First Solar? Yeah.
Well, no, nothing. It's coincidence. It's timing. So, they announced a restructuring earlier this year, as a quarter or so ago. They around the same time they shuttered TetraSun, and so they were pulling back from utility scale development and then going into community solar. So, I think what we have here is a company that is really trying to figure out what they want to do. And this is ironic and interesting because First Solar exists today because of timing and market timing. Timing is everything. And trust me, I have a point here. When Europe was booming because of the European fits, they shut down sales to any other market but Europe. They were there during the time when crystalline was too expensive or expensive, and when the market was booming and when crystalline was constrained.
Right.
And
this was like 2008, 2009-ish?
This is like 2004. So they started out around 2004. I'm not looking at my data, which I love. But they started out with like 5 megawatts of capacity, and now look at them.
Yeah.
So they learned how to develop their technology really well. They started recycling programs. Then, as the market in Europe started to go down, they focused on the U.S. and they built their development business. Timing. They have development businesses global. I'm not saying it was just the U.S., but they shipped their focus there. It was really development. Their modules went mostly into their own installations. They also use third-party modules. So now we have, again, another timing instance. They right now don't look like they have figured out the right strategy for this market point in time. And without talking and beating this poor dead horse, Sun Edison is a good example comparison-wise.
Yeah, I know. So I found it interesting because they made a really big splash about their Series 5 module at SPI. I interviewed them. They had lots of other booths that were showing their Series 5. And in their restructuring announcement, it was their last quarterly call, they said, we're not going to do Series 5 now. Nope, skip that. Let's jump right to Series 6. And it has to be related to the ridiculously low cost of crystalline.
No, not necessarily. No, it could be entirely technology focused. And so, what's happening way back years ago, this is a good comparison. When I was in software, there was a really big difference between what and I ran the beta program. I was kind of the middle person between, the engineers and who the customers that were testing our failed beta product and marketing, right? And there was a vast divide between what the engineers were saying was going on, what release was going to come out, what was really stable, and what the marketing people said to customers. So I'm not saying that marketing people are bad, but there is a vast difference between PR and between actual news, first of all, as you well know, because you're an excellent journalist. But also there's a vast difference. Sometimes it just makes more sense. This release obviously made more sense. I don't know enough about whether or not there were problems with the Series 5, but you do. It's a good lesson that for everybody to remember that just because somebody takes you on the floor and points you to their product and says, "Isn't this wonderful?" It may not be.
Yeah, right.
Or it may be, and there's just an economic or market reason to move on to something else.
And I think that's what's going on here. But so speaking of moving on, we need to move on. Let's do Tesla SolarCity. Okay. So they're officially, the shareholders approved the merger. It's happening. What do you think?
I think it's the year of voting strangely. I don't think there's an economic model here that makes sense. I don't think there's a good economic reason for these two companies to have merged. High debt, SolarCity side, massive losses. Tesla, I think they were positive. I'm not a car person. It's a SolarCity business model that now that net metering is changing in the U.S. really needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
It did not make sense.
Yeah.
But because I don't tell the future, I forecast things, and I don't forecast stuff like this. There was always a good chance that this was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a while ago, somebody asked me for a quote on another subject we're going to talk about, the Tesla tiles.
Oh, yeah.
And I got a lot of emails after that about how I didn't know what a vision was. Well, a vision and a fact are two different things. You have to have a vision, but it should be married to actual reality.
Mm-hmm.
And nonetheless, people like visions, and they like their feelings more than they like facts and reality.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not surprised or unsurprised. I'm just sort of...
We'll see what happens next. Well, let's talk about the solar tiles. I mean, their tile. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, so again, like that's another pretty high cost project or a product out there.
According to Mr. Musk, his solar roof is going to be cheaper than a regular roof. Of course, this is a statement made without any facts to back it up over a product that does not exist, that was probably a dummy cells in it. I don't know, but this was a prototype, not an actual functioning solar roof. It's essentially glass-on-glass modules. Tiles are not a new solar product. And I don't know, this is blue skying. This is saying the most optimistic thing you can so that everybody goes, wow, we want to believe that. It's really part of the same problem.
Yeah, so tiles have been tried a lot and they haven't worked. I mean, they just haven't taken off, and they've had different value propositions. They had the ones that looked like the California roof tiles, was it a Dow product, perhaps, the solar shingle? They canceled that recently. So, I mean, how do we...
They're more expensive, they're less efficient, and there are technical issues, which would be a whole entire segment of our 3-on-3.
Yeah.
So that's why.
Yeah.
And, standing up to me, this always felt like, sweetening the pot. Okay, if the deal goes through, I mean, he even said this, Mr. Musk. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm a naturally polite person, so Mr. Musk said this. He said that, this was their wonderful solar tile roof, the vision for the future, and if the deal didn't go through, then they probably wouldn't do it.
Right.
That's just sweetening the deal with something that doesn't exist again. On with that deal, there's also the Panasonic Solar MOU. I mean, the cost structure for Panasonic Solar does not fit manufacturing in the U.S. Doesn't even fit manufacturing in Japan anymore. Huh. That's why they manufacture also in Malaysia. So you have something that may not happen. You have Solevo, which I expect to be a Tetrasun announcement down the road. You have, whose cells are going to be in this glass-on-glass module, which is essentially what they're talking about. Yeah. There are just so many. It's just it's a vision.
You need to see more facts. You always need to see more facts.
Just say a fact.
Yeah. One fact would be nice. All right. Well, let's move on to, and I think that SolarCity is certainly part of this. But what's with the trend of manufacturers trying to reach homeowners? I mean, it's really been the installers that were selling the product, and then the distributors that are giving the product to the installer. So why do you think we're seeing some manufacturers try to actually just skip all that and go straight? I mean, SolarCity makes sense, but other manufacturers...
Well, they're not a manufacturer, really. Quite frankly, that's not new. It really depends on the market where that works. So in Japan, actually always been part of sales to homeowners were manufacturer direct to homeowners. So that's not new. There.
Interesting. Say more about that. What do you mean?
What do you mean? What do I mean?
Well, are you saying that they would market directly, like ads on TV?
Door-to-door sales. Actually, years ago, I remember going to my first conference in Japan and walking the floor, and you had a lot of customers resident homeowners, people walking the floor. It was a little bit like a car show with demos, so the relationship, what changed the market in Japan was the fit. It switched it to a commercial market from a residential market.
Yeah.
But they're a completely different sales plan. Manufacturers, and in the US, manufacturers, there's a long history of trying to reach out to homeowners. They just did it in the wrong way. I mean, so you would have Home Power magazine and Photon, and there would be ads in there, obviously geared towards home.
But
they don't need those magazines.
Yes, exactly. That's the thing. I mean, the homeowners that I know have no idea whose panels they have on their roof, have no idea whose inverters. I mean, I care because I'm in the industry, but they don't care. They just want it to work.
That doesn't mean it's new. This has been tried. What happens typically is someone new comes into the industry to a company and they say, wow, I know what we're not doing. And they say that, I've seen this a lot, by the way, over 20 years. They say that despite it having been tried many times. Yeah. So I have had manufacturers. So GE, years ago, when they were thinking of having their own technology, PV panel manufacturing, they were sure that the GE name would get them up on roofs. Uh-huh. And they were talking about door-to-door sales, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot, so it depends on the market whether or not that's going to work. Japan, yes. US, never has before. It worked with the solar lease. Yes. And it worked because of no money down.
Right. I mean, well, all right. So in Japan, did that model work?
The solar lease?
No, the marketing directly to customers.
Yes. It's a different culture.
Yeah.
I mean, their electricity rates are very high, have always been. They're more they're an island nation. They're more connected to their electricity needs. Right. They understand, I mean, it's like the argument for storage, right? Batteries and back to Tesla a little bit with its Powerwall, right? If you have an unreliable grid or you really hate your utility, not unusual, then you lean towards wanting storage so you can be self-sufficient. If you have a reliable grid, your electricity rates aren't so high, you may talk about wanting to do that, but not that many people do.
Right.
So in Japan, there's a whole different, cultural awareness of energy and the need to, and self-sufficiency, et cetera, et cetera. There's electric houses there. Mm-hmm. So it's completely different culturally from here. In the U.S., it only worked when you said...
No, absolutely. No, I mean, I guess I'm trying to get at, and we're going over here, but I'm curious because I want to ask you this. So do you have evidence, or you feel like the actual panel manufacturers gained market share by going door to door? And they were specified. Homeowners were saying, I want that panel. Yeah, in Japan.
In Japan, yes.
Yeah.
In Japan, very competitive.
Okay.
Not so much anymore because of, low prices killed, a lot of competitiveness globally. That's a whole other 3-on-3 discussion. But in Japan, and it may not still be true, I would need to check this, but they're willing to pay a little bit more for Japanese modules if they're a homeowner to put on their roof. In the U.S., very rarely do you see that.
No, very rarely. Agree. Listen, we have so much more to talk about, but we're already way over. So we have to say goodbye to everybody. And thank you so much for joining us. Please send us your ideas. And that's all for today.
Bye.
Bye.